Hi, it's your buddy John, and I'm here with my buddy Jason, and we're back again. You may recall we did some how-to videos last year, and we're back. We said we were going to be back, but things happened, and it took a little bit longer, I think, than either one of us expected it to take, but we did promise we'd be back, and here we are. So
2019's been interesting so far.
Right? It's been really interesting for him and really busy for me. So what do you have on deck here today to show?
On deck, we're going to go back in the Wayback Machine for about 8 years.
Okay.
And we're going to cover a project that, for me, it's been an ongoing project, but it's also one that I've pretty well nailed all the quirks out of.
Okay.
What we're going to be looking at is MTH Daylight train sets. These are the 1939, 1941 built cars. And they're beautiful models. They're mechanically very nice. BLI, it turns out, came out with the same exact cars the same year.
Oh, so that's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, it's happened too many times in the hobby recently. We have two good big manufacturers come out with exactly the same thing, exactly the same time, and collide in the market. And so it's been a yin and yang kind of deal with different people going, oh, I want BLI or I want MTH. Well, we selected at the club in San Diego, La Mesa Club, we decided to get a set of the MTH cars to be able to do the San Joaquin Daylight.
Okay.
Which is just a cool train. And because they came out in plastic, the club decided, hey, let's do a plastic train so we can display it. So we got the cars, and I think it was actually 2 sets of the equipment at my house, rebuilding it at the same time. Bringing all the mechanical standards up, making all the little corrections to make them more historically accurate, things like that. About 6 months after I got the cars done, we had them at the layout, and one of the antenna stanchions broke, and MTH doesn't supply parts.
That's not good.
No, that was a problem. I had to supply my spare car to the club as a loaner until we figured out what we were going to do, and nobody makes those parts.
And they came as plastic parts?
They came as plastic parts, and the little tops of them go boink.
That's
like
very delicate.
Yeah,
antennas.
Very
delicate.
very, very fine part. Yeah, so what Owl Mountain did in 2017 thereabout, when we were doing some of the stuff with, or actually I guess that was 2018 already, good grief. Yeah, 2018, we were doing stuff with Shapeways, and one of the things I did was I pioneered 3D printing replacement stanchions.
I think you showed me those at Barrier Prototype Modelers Meet, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And you've seen those.
I remember that. They look like
year.
little arrowheads.
Yeah, exactly. We have 22 of them on a sprue. It was offered, and then things with Shapeways didn't work out, and we decided to go full on and do the parts as brass castings.
Oh, cool.
And so we're also selling them now. With that, we're also able to lower the price, which was nice, and we're including the phosphor bronze wire, and so you basically solder them together it comes as a complete kit.
Oh, that's great.
And it's enough for 4 cars.
That's really great.
So I think it's 2 or 3 sets of these parts. This is Owl Mountain 1009.
Okay.
It's a replacement set. It does 4 cars, which is about 1/3 of a full train set.
Okay. Sounds great. So you're going to show how to put
those on? So we're going to show how to put those on.
Okay.
The cars from MTH also had a few other minor cosmetic issues that we had to deal with, and a minor deal with the wheel gauge, but that's a club thing, that club additional standard that we had. So I had to figure out a way to deal with the trucks and modify the trucks to be able to have the wheel gauge adjusted, which it's not NMRA uncompliant. It's just the club has an additional standard.
Yeah. He's part of the club in San Diego, the La Mesa Club, and they have very strict, some would say maybe even higher standards than what your NMRA standard is. So, but they're very strict about it.
Yeah.
So that's really what you're talking about.
Yeah, not to knock the NMRA, but there's over the last 40 years or so, there's been certain refinements in the hobby industry. Things have changed. Wheel gauge has changed, but they've changed the flange contours.
So in effect, it puts slop into the process?
Exactly. And so the club found a way to specify that ambiguity. And so basically to build the cars for the club, I had to make that change. So it's not a big deal. You don't have to do this, but if you want to, you can. And the rest of the changes to the cars are pretty much cosmetic decal changes and a few other things, a little extra paint here and there to hide certain little sins that the manufacturers didn't bother to do.
Sounds like an adventure. Let's head over to the workbench.
So, Now we're at the workbench, and we're looking at a set of MTH Daylight articulated cars. These are pretty much the same as any MTH Daylight car will be mechanically. These are a little bit more complicated because we have the articulated joint here. So let's go ahead and work through the modifications that I've done on basically every MTH car that's gone through my shop for service at La Mesa, and I'll note the La Mesa modifications versus the detail modifications and things that generally should probably be done to these models. So to start with, for the pre-1946 cars, the Southern Pacific lines, which should be in this font and have a lines and then have it recentered, would be correct. MTH made a researching mistake in that when they dropped the lines for the June 1946 scheme, they recentered the lettering, dropped the lines, and didn't extend the lettering to the 1946 version. So after the lettering, we'll be dealing with the antenna stanchions. These unfortunately are done in plastic with a very fine wire going through a cast loop in the stanchion. And what happens is the top of the loop just breaks. Despite the best handling, something hits the top of the car and just breaks it. So what we'll be doing is replacing that with one of the Owl Mountain Models 1009 wire kits, and they have brass stanchions here and wire to be soldered on, so we'll be doing that. And on this car, I've already done it. The underbody has been painted. Certain angles here you can see where there's still the interior color. MTH painted the entire interior of the car yellow or blue or whatever, and they didn't paint the lower part of it black, which is visible from certain angles, so we'll be doing that. And one of the other things we'll be doing is adding lead weight down the center sill, which is a La Mesa Club modification. It gives the cars a little bit more weight, and with the full width diaphragms, having the car weigh just a little bit more helps the track and the diaphragms to function properly. One other La Mesa modification will be modifying the gauge of the wheel sets. They technically meet NMRA standards, but for the club there are a few tweaks that we'll be doing there, and I'll also be showing modifications, basically just moving the coupler in slightly to match the close coupled configuration. So that will pretty much cover the MTH Daylight cars. So now we've separated the car and turned one of them over. We're going to show how to modify the coupler box here. The cars all come with the coupler in an extended position where it'll leave about 1/8 of an inch gap between the cars when they're coupled. I'm bending the steam line out of the way, and now I can get access to the screw. Back that out. Now I can lift the entire coupler out. And as you can see here, there's two holes. The outer hole is one that was just being used, so we'll be reassembling the coupler using the inner hole. So I'm going to actually remove the steam pipe casting there. Just lift it out. So I just put the coupler back in the inner position, close couple position, checking that it moves freely. And now the coupler is even with the striker plate here. There we go. Right there. And then we'll put the steam coupling back in its mounting hole there. One little modification here is to make sure that you can still move the coupler past the steam coupling there on the end. So I'll usually pull that back slightly and make sure that it's also not down to catching on switches and things. So that's pretty good there. Should work. See as it catches. There we go. Okay, next step, I'm going to take off the water tank and glue up the frame pieces so that they'll stay in the proper position when I start making the modifications to put the extra weight in. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the truck so that it just is out of the way. So we'll set that aside. And now, very carefully, with a loud pop. That's okay because what I'm doing is actually popping out these studs from the frame. So that's good shape. We'll set that aside. And I'm going to get my Tamiya liquid glue. And I'm going to come in and glue each of the cross members. Down in behind the steam line there. Alright. I have to let that dry for a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to use my plastic sprue cutters that we saw last time in the building lumber loads video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and cut the cross members. So this is basically going in here to create room for the lead weight, which you'll see here in a second. I'm bending the steam pipe out of the way so I can get a good flush joint cut on the cross sills. So now each of the cross sill pieces here, these three middle ones, have been cut, and that's these three pieces running around on the desk. And now, let's get those out of the way. These are pre-machined cut weights made out of lead. You can get this usually at a roofing flashing shop. You can just buy sheet lead there. And so what's going to happen is that'll fit in there and I'll be able to wedge the second piece in on top of it. So what I'll do now is grab my metal cutting snippers and come in and cut the weight right there. And that should fit in there nicely, which it does. And actually, I think what I'll do is I'll just cut the second piece to be the same length. There we go. Now, I need to cut a slight bevel on the lead to be able to let it wedge in. So I'm getting a number 11 blade out. This one doesn't have to be super sharp to do this, although it helps. Yes, I'm working with lead. I'll wash my hands here when I'm done. So let's see if this will now slide in properly. Not quite. Needs a little more. I'm also going to do the back side because it is working against the other block of lead. I switched over now to a trailing cut, so I'm not slicing, I'm now dragging just to reshape the lead. There we go. Okay, so after a couple minutes I was able to get the pair of weights nestled down into the frames with a little bit of cyanoacrylate CA super glue, and that should be drying nicely in there. It's time to reassemble the car, but before I do that I'm going to go ahead and cut down the mounting pins on the water tank so that will fit over the weight. So we'll grab my cutting tool and normally these will be slightly above the There we go. The weight's hanging down just a hair, so right now I'm going to cut these slightly tall and make it so that I'll nestle in there. There's that. Using my liquid glue again. Alright, so this is the La Mesa Club modification to the wheel sets. Basically, this is only required if you want to go a little bit more accurate on the wheel gauge. NMRA specifies the back-to-back distance between the back faces of the wheel here and here, and that's defined with the full RP25 contour of the flange. Over about the last 15 years, back around the early 2000s, basically all the manufacturers that I know of went to what they call a sub-RP25 contour wheel, which means it's thinner than the actual full RP25 contour, which is what's on the gauge. So right now, I can fit the gauge onto this wheel set, which by NMRA standards would say the wheel set's in gauge. However, I can also move the gauge vertically, in this case upwards, and catch on the lower flange, and then I can make it so the upper flange does not go into the gauge. So for La Mesa Club, we have a standard that says you have to be able to bias the wheel gauge and have the wheel set go into the gauge, which is not the way most wheel sets are manufactured right now. It's about a 10,000ths tight for La Mesa standard is what most wheel sets are now. The next step will be disassembling the truck. And these trucks are held together by 4 very small claws at the corners just inside of the contacts, and those are released from the back side of the bottom of the truck, and I'm going to carefully push each one of them with the tip of my screwdriver here, like that, and that should release this retaining clip like that. And now with that released, I can pull the wheel sets out, and this is always the fun part. Eventually what I'm going to be doing is cutting the end sills of the trucks anyway, because the trucks need to be slightly spread. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these sections of the truck right now. That'll make it so I can get the wheel sets out easier. Like that. Now I can pop the wheel sets out easily. And the pickup bars drop out. So that's the truck field stripped. This truck frame we won't really be doing anything else with at this point once I've cut those pieces. The pickup bars, basically I'm going to bend them slightly towards the journal side of the bearings here. And now the wheel set, I'm going to grab the 2 wheels and twist slightly as I pull apart, and now I can grab the wheel gauge and check. Again, I'm pushing up with the gauge. I barely moved that one. I'll need to move the wheel set a little bit further. I can actually see a gap in the wheel tube down there now, so that's not quite far enough. There we go. So now the wheel set's been gauged, and I will just reiterate that this is a La Mesa Club standard modification that helps the cars run on that layout better. It doesn't have to be done on all these cars. It's not like the MTH cars are out of gauge. According to NMRA, they are in gauge. It's a modification that the club does just to make sure that the cars run well there. So now that I've re-gauged the wheel sets, there's a slight bit of metal showing on the inner part of these axles outside of the black tube, and so what I'm going to do is take some thick CA and flow it into that joint where between the wheel and the tube insulating core. I'm going to use the tip of the screwdriver blade here to get it to flow all the way around. Basically, this becomes a spacer to keep the wheel set from folding or collapsing in the future. I want to keep the wheel at the gauge that I have it set right now because I'm sure that it's correct. And with work, it is possible to break these loose, but it takes quite a bit of effort to change the gauge again. Okay, so it's been a few minutes. The super glue is now dried. So we're going to start reassembling the truck by putting the pickup bars back in. These are always a little fun to get in there. There we go. Because I changed the geometry of the pickup bars, things are a little bit different on the fit right now. So that's why things are just not quite snapping in as easily. So I'm actually bending the side frames of the plastic side frames out slightly to be able to get all the pieces to re-engage properly. There we go. I want these little fingers to get back over the truck bolster. There we go. Alright, so that's all back in there. And now I let the glue dry to make sure that I can spread the side frame here without having problems changing the gauge. So if you didn't glue the wheel sets at this point, you'd change the gauge immediately as soon as you stretch the truck. There we go. Okay, now being able to re-gauge the wheel set and spread the pickup bars out makes it so the wheels can still spin. If you didn't spread the pickup bars to give the truck a little bit more width on the length of the axles, they'd bind up and you wouldn't be able to have the wheels turn basically at all. So now we'll just drop this back onto the car. Alrighty, so there's the truck back on the car. Alright, so we've opened the Owl Mountain 1009 kit. I designed these particular castings particularly for this application because with the stanchions breaking and not really having a good way to replace the parts and have it functional again and look decent, I could see that there was an opening in the market to be able to do something for this application. So we decided to go with a hard brass casting. I'll go ahead and get it out of the bag here. And this casting has 22 stanchions on it. The bases are designed to fit down into the holes in the car. And I can open this here and we can look over the instructions real quick. They're very basic. Shouldn't take very long to put this on the car. So with no further ado, we will get to it. And I'm going to use my pliers. And in this particular case, none of the stanchions have broken yet. It's kind of weird when they do break. It's usually because something pushes down on the roof or something like that, like when you're going in and out of your box, going to the train layout or whatever. This is very easily removed. I'm going to go ahead and cut one of these off. And remember that there are 2 extras. This is 22 stanchions, and 4 cars will only need 20 stanchions. This is a number 61 drill bit. The instructions call for a number 60 drill bit for the minor diameter of the stanchions. Turns out I'm noticing that the 3 middle holes here, and actually this end hole as well, were slightly like a slot, not round. So I'm just going to go ahead and burnish these holes out. Doesn't take very much. If you want to install these stanchions on something like the Athearn Genesis coach or chair car that doesn't have any stanchions to begin with, but prototypically they did, you can add these stanchions to those cars without too much trouble. It's just a matter of laying out where these holes need to be and drilling 2 sets of holes. So I've grabbed one of the stanchions with my pliers. I've cut the bottom off at a good diameter, and I'm going to put that right into the roof like that. And I'm making sure that I get the stanchion aligned with the roof of the line of the car. So that one looks pretty good. Okay, so that was a dry fit. I'm going to pull it back out of the roof of the car. Get my super glue here. Get a small drop on the and that will also function as a kind of a seam filler in the actual joint with the super glue. All right, and a little bit of super glue squeezed out on the far side there. I'll probably be able to scrape that off later and cover it with the finished coat of black paint. The real ones, actually, they sealed the base of these with like some kind of tar substance, probably car cement, roofing cement type stuff. It was, shall we say, not very clinically hospital clean work that they did necessarily. So all 5 stanchions have been glued into the roof with the U-shaped slots in line with the car. And we're putting a little bit of flux on the top of the stanchion. Make sure I got a good amount there. I'm going to grab about 1 cubic millimeter of solder on the soldering iron. So about like that. I'm going to set the wire into the notch. And that's solid. I think there's still enough solder on the iron here to do one more. Repeat the soldering process for each of the following stanchions. So now that we've got all these soldered on, I'm going to very lightly go across the joints with a file, and this will just knock off any spiky parts of the solder that was pulled off as the iron left the model. This also can be done with emery paper or very fine sandpaper, works nicely for this. And now once that's done, I'm going to grab my metal cutting clippers here and cut off the rest of the antenna material at the ends of the car. Like that. Okay, now I've finished painting the antenna stanchions and so forth with lacquer black paint. I don't generally use acrylic on the metal parts because generally it doesn't stick quite as well. So this is all done. These parts are nice and springy. You can kind of sit here and almost pluck them like a little harp. You have different spacings of the antennas, so it'll sound different, but that's playing with the model more than you probably should. The next step I'm going to be showing is how to redo the lettering board and correct the lettering. One of the things we're going to be using that you probably have not seen before is a fiberglass weathering brush. This is sold by PBL, and this is a fiberglass brush, a steel brush, and a brass brush in a case. So with the fiberglass brush, I have the brushes sticking out about 1/10 of an inch right now, and I'm going to very carefully start scrubbing on the lettering. It doesn't take much. Once it starts lifting the lettering off, like already you can see that it's starting to get rid of the lettering. And I'm being very careful right now because what I don't want to do is scratch through the red paint into the gray plastic. So I apologize for putting the eraser sort of over the... Yeah, that's almost there. the shorter that the bristles are, the stiffer they will be, and the harder it's going to be pushing in and scratching the material. If you want to have the bristles longer, like now I've pushed it out to maybe 3/16, they'll be a bit softer as I do the same technique, and it should take me a little bit longer to get the effect. It'll be a little bit more forgiving. Again, we've pretty well wiped out most of the lettering already on this area. So now we've removed the whole letterboard with the brush. I've shortened it back up a little bit. I nicked this white line in a couple places. Try not to do that. Although in reality, the passenger car washing machines tended to burn those through a little bit as well. So it's not exactly the end of the world that happened. So now we're going to put down a gloss coat. That's going to be pretty much normal. There's a couple ways to do it. You can either mask each of the windows, trim around the windows, and gloss coat the whole car side. Or what I'm going to do is just gloss coat the red letterboard section where the decals are going to go. So now the gloss coat has been applied over the letterboard section here, so it's a little bit glossier than the rest of the car side. At this point, I'm just going to use some Southern Pacific letterboard decals, microscale 208 Sunset Limited letterboard set, which is about as good as I can get. I'm not looking for the straight, non-pinstriped letterboard decals, which are available, but those started being used after 1954, I believe it was. So the version I'm going to be doing is slightly earlier that has the pinstriping around it still. Here we have the car completed with the microscale decals, set 208, showing the correct extended letterboard lettering for the Southern Pacific after June 1946.
So I have to say I'm really impressed with the process, number one, and it's all pretty easy stuff. The antenna stanchion is really easy because all you really need to know is just some soldering. Other than that, you're just drilling out the hole and gluing it. That's not a big deal.
Make sure to put the U channel linked
of course,
to the car. That if you make that mistake, I don't know what to do.
Well, if you make that mistake on one, you'll only make it once because you can't put the wire on otherwise.
Yeah, and to be fair, let's just say if that does happen, it's pretty easy with the super glue to just turn it with your pliers. It's not a big deal.
If you have any trouble, call me because I have a hammer too. No, but seriously, I want to say that the other thing, and I've never seen this before, was that fiberglass thing that you did with the printing on the car. That was pretty cool because it works almost like an eraser or something.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. How did you find that out? Is that something you came up with?
No, that was actually I think the first one I was introduced to was by the car shop foreman at La Mesa.
Oh, interesting.
About 20 years ago. He's like, here, check this out. And
that's like an inside secret or something. Because like I said, I've been around this model stuff, as you know, for quite some time, and I have never seen that before. It's
been really hard to find those recently, and I just found out a matter of a couple of years ago that PBL's was the one that was importing them now. So
cool.
So they're back at least in the U.S. via PBL.
I think that trick alone might be worth the time it took to watch the video. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and it'll work on pretty much anything you have. UP diesels, you want to re-decal the side of the cab or something like that, you just go in there and take off the lettering. And the problem with painting over lettering and things like that is the pad printing actually adds thickness.
Sure.
So if you paint
embossed.
it's actually adding material on top because it's ink transfer.
Right, so it looks like it's embossed.
Yeah, it's actually thicker, and if you paint over it, you can still see it.
Right.
So the only way to really get rid of that is either to strip it, and oftentimes that'll take off the paint of the underlying layers on the model. You don't want to do that necessarily, especially with something like yellow. Mm-hmm. And so with the eraser, you can go in and scratch off just the lettering and bring it down to the normal layer of paint. You just have to be careful not to scratch through.
Right.
And like on the Daylight cars, some of them, I'll admit, I scratch through, and so you just have to mask the letterboard. And usually it's 40 or 50 thousandths inside of the white lines. Mm-hmm. It's like the corner of the letterboard you scratch through, and so you just go back in and do a couple light coats of Daylight red, and it matches with the MTH car set paint job, and it's easy to just continue it. It's a minor mistake, and it's one of those things that as you do more stuff in the hobby and you start modifying models more, you will have mistakes like that, and you just need to learn the tricks and techniques. You know, all the masters make mistakes. If they tell you they don't, there's something fishy going on.
That's how they get good at what they do, because they've made a lot of mistakes.
Lots of practice, lots of mistakes, and learning how to fix your mistakes without having to scrap everything and start over.
Right. Well, I hope you learned something. If you did, put a comment below. And if you have any questions for Jason, you put a comment below too, because he's pretty good at checking on these things once they're on. I think you just like to watch yourself on the video.
No, I don't have time for that. A few of them we've checked in now and then, but most of the time not.
He's watching himself on the video.
No, actually, one of the things I do, though, is on certain forums and so forth, I will post links to videos and stuff from TSG and push your stuff.
The stuff that you've done?
No, other things too.
But then they come and tune into my channel and they see how good looking I am and they forget that they were reading your blog.
Yep, that's right. That's how it works.
We'll be back next time on the next episode of whatever this is.
I need to have you like on a phone call in my ear and like, don't do that. Do the thing. Not that. No.
Not that
Not
thing.
on stage.
The other thing.
Not on stage. Don't do that. No. Oh. So much for our ratings.